We continue now at the top of Daf Memches Amid Beis Mesechet Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 48b. On the previous Amid, the Gemara brought a brisa to ask a question on Rav and Shmuel. Again, Rav and Shmuel's case is as follows. Let's say you have a situation of a malva and a lova. The malva has a star with which to collect from the lova, but now the lova dies first. So when the malva collects from the yarshim of the lova, he really has to take a shvua that he hasn't yet collected, because you're supposed to take a shvua when you collect from the yarshim. Now, if the malva were then to die, so then the yarshim, they would be collecting, the Yarshe HaMalva would be collecting from the Yarshe HaLova, and they have to take a Shvuah. The Shvuah they generally have to take is called the Shvuas Yarshim. It's not exactly the same Shvuah as the Malva, because they don't know all of the business dealings of their father, the Malva, so they essentially take a Shvuah that to the best of their knowledge, the debt was not yet collected. And Rav and Shmuel, they say, if you have this situation where, again, the Lova dies first, the Malva was now chayiv to take his Shvuah, and then he dies, so he can't bequeath his Shvuah to his Yarshim, because they can't take the exact same shvuah that he was going to take, because he was going to take a shvuah with certainty. He knows his business dealings. He knows that he's owed the money. They're taking a shvuah yarshim that to the best of their knowledge they are owed the money. And so in that situation, say Rav and Shmuel, the Yarshe HaMalva actually are not able to take a shvuah and collect, because a person is not able to bequeath the shvuah to his heirs, so to speak. And so therefore, since they cannot take the same exact shvuah that their father would have taken, so they cannot collect. And so the Gemara now again is in the middle of asking from a brisa. The brisa says that the strength of the son is greater than the strength of the father. Shehaben gove, because the son can collect bein b'shvua ubein shelo b'shvua. He'll sometimes collect with an oath, and sometimes he'll collect without an oath. V'ha'av eino gove ela b'shvua, and the father only collects with an oath, and that's why the son has a greater strength than the father. And the Gemara says, now, hechidami, what exactly is the case of this brisa? The case is exactly the case that Rav and Shmuel are talking about. To meis lova b'chai malva. The case is that the lova died first. He died when the malva was alive. Again, the malva then has to take a shvuah to collect from the yarshim of the lova. V'katani, and it says, shahaben gova bein b'shvuah ubein shelo b'shvuah. The son can collect sometimes with a shvuah, sometimes without a shvuah. And what does it mean b'shvuah? What do you mean sometimes he collects with a shvuah? Shvuah as a yarshin, he takes the shvuah as a yarshin. That's against Rav and Shmuel, because he's not taking the exact same shvuah as his father. His father was taking a shvuah with certainty that he was owed the money. He's taking a shvuah as a yarshim that to the best of his knowledge he's owed the money. And sometimes you can have a case, shelo b'shvuah. Sometimes the son will actually not even have to take a shvuah. That follows Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, that follows Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, as we'll see in a moment in Rashi. And Rashi explains, Shahaben Gove, again, the son can collect, Bishtar, again, he has a document, and he's collecting Min HaYisomin from the orphans, that's the heirs of the Lova, he's collecting from them. Bishvuas Yarshim, he's going to take a Shvuas Yarshim, as we just said, Kishe'ein lo Eidim Sha'amar Ha'ab B'shas Misaso, Shtar Ze'eno Parua. Now, he has to take that Shvuas Yarshim if he has no witnesses that the father said at the time of his death that this shtar was not yet paid up. That's the classic Shvuas Yarshim. And again, according to Rav and Shmuel, he won't be able to take that Shvuah. That's why this is a question on Rav and Shmuel. Now, when does he collect without a shvuah? The shelo b'shvuah kasheyejedim sho'amar ha'ab b'shas misa. So let's say there are witnesses that the father said at the time of his death that this shtar still was not collected. So then actually he wouldn't even need to take a shvuah, because he essentially has witnesses to the fact that this money is owed. And that's Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. That's like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel to Masnisin. That's what Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said in our Mishnah. V'ha'av ilu hayakayim lo hayanamon ela b'shvuah. And the point over here is that the father, if he were alive, he would have to take a shvuah. But again, according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, you can have this scenario where, let's say, there are witnesses that the father said at the time of his death that shtar ze'eno parua, then actually the son doesn't have to swear. And the point is, umi dekatani v'ha'av eino gova ela b'shvuah, from the fact that it says the father only collects with a shvuah, al karcha chechidami, what do we have to be talking about? We're talking to mis lova b'chai malva. We're talking when the borrower died while the malva, the lender, was alive. V'katani haben gova b'shvuah, and we see that the son does collect with a shvuah, the shvuas yarshim. Alma adam morish shvuah. You see that a person can bequeath a shvuah. And we will note over here the Reb Shimon ben Gamliel that's being referenced is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel of the Mishnah on Daf Mem Hey Amid Aleph. Again, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says over here, Amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, Im yesh edim she'amar ha'av b'shas misaso. If there are witnesses that the father said at the time of his death, shtar ze eino parua, that the shtar has not yet been paid off, hu noto shelo b'shvuah, he takes without a shvuah. Again, that's what the Gemara here is referencing. And in any case, the Gemara here continues and answers. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Hamani, who is the author of this brisa? Again, we're trying to bring this brisa as a question against Rav and Shmuel, but really, who's the author of this brisa? It's Beis Shammai. This brisa is following Beis Shammai, the Amri, that they say, Shtar homid ligvos kagavoy dami, that a star that is ready to be collected is as if it is collected. And Rashi explains Beis Shammai, it's Beis Shammai b'Meseches Sota. This is Beis Shammai, Meseches Sota, Perak Arusa v'Shemeres Yavim, the Katani, Meis Bala ad Shalosh Shasa. The case over there is as follows. Let's say her husband died, she didn't yet drink the bitter waters of the sota, which are going to determine whether she committed adultery or not. The question is in terms of now collecting her ksuba. It really is a doubt whether or not she should be able to collect her ksuba. So no telas ksubas v'lo shosa. So she takes her ksuba and she doesn't drink the water because she doesn't drink the water if her husband died. Because again, the pasuk says there's a requirement that the husband has to bring his wife. Here he's not around. Veleka, you can't fulfill that part of the pasuk. Now afa gav the shema zinsa. Now, even though she may have committed adultery, gova misafik, the point over here is that she is able to collect her ksuv misafik, savar misha hanechasim mishubadim lo yado al halyona, because we hold that the person who the nechasim, the property, there's a lien on that property, they actually have the upper hand. She has a lien on the property because she has a ksuba. V'hanechasim bechezkas bal hashtar omdin, and the nechasim, the property, is actually in the possession of the person who holds the shtar, ki ilu hu gavay v'yom, and it says if it's already collected. So here we have a suffix, whether she's allowed to collect her ksuba or not, but we say hamotzim mechaver olav haraya, and according to Beis Shammai, she actually is the one in possession, so therefore she gets the ksuba. Therefore, she collects from suffix. The Masoras Hasha says it should be he, that she collects, it should not be who. He gova mi suffix, she collects out of a doubt. She'ena bo lahotzi mehem sheteha raya olel lahavi. It's not like she's taking from them that she needs to bring the evidence. Elaheim boim lahotzi mehem. We actually look at it from the other perspective. It's as if they're trying to take from her. And so now we apply this logic over here. We can say the same thing. Let's say the lova dies during the lifetime of the malva. So in this situation, again, the malva, if he has a shibud, if he has a shtar, so it's really as if it's in his possession. And so therefore they have possession. Now even though the Rabbanan say that the collection can only be with a shvua, mamun gomer hu lahorish labanav, but it's still considered in his possession that he can be morish, that he can bequeath that to his children. And so now again you have a situation where the lova died, the malva had to take a shvua, then the malva died, and so now that goes down to the malva's children. Now you have a situation in terms of shvuas yarshim, because they can't take the exact same shvua as their father. Is that going to be a problem? According to Beis Shammai, it will not be a problem, because according to Beis Shammai, they are actually considered to be in possession. It essentially becomes like a case where there is a shvua that they have to take, but they're not able to take because they can't take the exact same shvua as their father. And Rav and Shmuel actually also said earlier that in such a situation, the shvua actually goes back to Sinai and everything stays in its place. The money stays in its place. But again, according to Beis Shammai, where is the money? The money is already with them. The money is already with the heirs of the malva, because having a shtar, having a lien, it's as if it's already collected. And that's the explanation of this brisa, and that's why this brisa is not a question against Rav and Shmuel, because it's following Beis Shammai. And the Gemara continues, Ikler Rav Nachman l'Sura, Rav Nachman traveled to Sura, O l'Gabe, Rav Chisda v'Rav bar Rav Huna, Rav Chisda and Rav bar Rav Huna, they visited Rav Nachman. Amrulei, they said to him, Leisi mar neakro laha de Rav Shmuel, let the master come and let's uproot this halacha of Rav and Shmuel. In other words, again, let's uproot this idea that a person can't be morish the shvua lebanav, he's not able to bequeath the shvua, so to speak, to his children. Let's uproot that halacha. Amar Lahu, he said to them, Ichveli vasoy kolhani parsi, did I travel all of these parcel lemekra in order to uproot lahad Rav Shmuel, in order to just uproot this halacha of Rav and Shmuel? That I don't want to do. Elohavu delo losif Allah, but what we should do is we shouldn't add on to that halacha. In the case that Rav and Shmuel said what they said, we'll apply it over there, but we're not going to apply that to other cases. Rashi explains, Ichveli vasoy kolhani parsi tarachti ubasi lavo mimakomi lakan, did I bother and come all the way from my place to here, la'akor l'derav Shmuel, to uproot Rav and Shmuel? Havadalo lahosef Allah, better that we don't add on. Hizminu atzmechem shelo lilmod mimena, prepare yourselves not to learn from it, but makam acher, to some other halacha, to some other context. Meaning to say, Heim Amrua, they said their halacha in a specific case, B'shvua haboli para minichse yisomim, in a case where again a malve has to take a shvua to collect from yisomim, she'eno morish oso lebanov, that he's not able to bequeath that to his children, in meis lova b'chai malve, again in a situation where the borrower died while the malve was alive, but al tilmedu mimena hamechuyev shvua acher. So let's not learn it to another case where somebody might be obligated a different shvua. Umefarish hashas, and the Gemara is about to explain, kegon hadamar rapapa, it's like the case of rapapa. Hapogem shtaro, let's say if somebody who blemishes his shtar, so to speak, shahoda bebezin sheniskabel katsas, he's holding a shtar, he wants to collect with it, but he also admits in court that already he did collect some. Utanan lo yipares hashar el b'shvua. So there also is a situation of an oath. The Mishnah says that he can only collect the rest with a shvua. Via mason, if he dies, yorshin nishboin shvuas yorshin v'nolin. So there, the heirs, they cannot take the exact same shvua as he can take. So they take shvuas yorshin and they collect. V'lo avdinan ba k'Rav Shmuel. There, we're not going to apply the halach of Rav and Shmuel, Tiamrei and other Moresh Shvuah Labanav, who say that a person cannot be Moresh a Shvuah to his children. As the Gemara now continues, Kigon Mai, when you're saying not to add on to some other context or some other case, what's an example of that? The Amar Rapapa, like Rapapa said, Hapogim Eshtaro, let's say somebody ruins his shtar, blemishes his shtar by admitting it's partially been paid. V'meis, and he dies, Yorshin Nishboin Shvuas Yorshin V'nolin. So then the heirs, they're able to take the Shvuas Yorshin and they're able to collect. And the Gemara continues, Hahu Deshachiv V'shavak Arva. There was a case where a person died and he left a guarantor. So he owed money, but he had an Orev. He had a guarantor who was going to pay off his debt. So Savar Apapa Lamemer, Apapa thought to say, Hanami, the lo losef Allahu. This would be another example where we shouldn't add on, we shouldn't apply Rav and Shmuel's halacha over here. But Amar Le Ravuna Breid Rav Yoshua Rapapa, Ravuna the son of Rav Yoshua said to Rapapa, in this case we actually would apply it. Because Atu Arva Lav Basar Yasmi Azal, what is the guarantor going to do? He's going to go after the Yisomim, he'll go after the orphans, and so therefore essentially it's the same case. Rashi explains, Hahud Shachav Shavak Arva, again a person died and he left an Arev. The case is Ruvain Halova L'Shimon, Ruvain Hilva L'Shimon rather, Al Yadei Arev. Ruvain lent money to Shimon and there was an Arev, so he lent the money, but there was an Arev who was going to pay if Shimon couldn't pay. Uvishtar, and there was a document. Umeis Lova B'chai Malva was exactly the same case. The Lova died while the Malva was alive, so you have a situation over here where Ruvain was now collecting from the Yorshim. V'neschayiv Malva Shvua, so the Malva really technically has to take a Shvua. V'yachar kach meis Malva, and then the Malva dies. And so now you have orphans collecting from orphans. Uvo Yisomim Liparim and Arif. So the Yisomim, they want to collect, but they don't collect directly from the other orphans. They really technically are collecting from the guarantor. And so that's why he said, this should also be a case, the lo losef Allahu. This should be a case we shouldn't apply Rav and Shmuel. Normally we say in this case that the orphans cannot collect from the other orphans, because again, a person cannot be Morish Ashua. But over here, they're collecting from a guarantor, not from the orphans. Shehem Amru Bi Yisomim Hanifraim Min HaYisomim. The halach of Rav and Shmuel was specifically when orphans collect from orphans. The kan nifroi and min arif, here they're collecting from the arif, and so maybe we don't apply the halacha. But the Gemara says no, it really is the same, because if they collect from the arif, if you're going to allow them to collect from the arif will simply collect from the yarshim. Basar yasmi the lova azal, he's going to go after the yisomim of the lova. The havalei ki yisomim mi yisomim, it therefore is treated exactly as orphans collecting from orphans, and we will apply the halacha of Rav and Shmuel that you can't be morish the shvua, and therefore they cannot collect. And the Gemara continues along the same lines. There was a person who died, and instead of leaving over children, he left over a brother. And so Rami Bar Chama thought to say, Hanami delo losef Allahu, is this also a situation we shouldn't add on? In other words, there's the idea that if the Yarshim of the Malva, the children of the Malva, so they can't inherit, so to speak, his Shvua, and therefore they cannot collect. But what if the Malva doesn't have children? What if it's a brother instead who's collecting? So maybe that should be different. And we should say that he is allowed to take the Shvuas Yarshim in that case. The Gemara says, Amar le Rava, Rava said to him, Mali shalo pakadni abba, what's the difference between a person taking a Shvua that my father never instructed me, meaning to the best of my knowledge in terms of my father's business dealings, that's the typical Shvuas Yarshim. Umali shalo pakadni achi, what's the difference if he says that my brother did not instruct me? It doesn't matter if it's the children of the Malva or the brother of the Malva, it's the exact same logic, and actually the halacha of Rav and Shmuel would apply equally to a brother, that he's not going to be able to collect, since he can't take the same Shvua that his brother who died was going to take. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Chama says, Hashto de Luitmar Hilchas Aloka Rav Shmuel, Veloka Rabbi Elazar. Now that we don't know exactly what the halacha is, whether it's like Rav and Shmuel who say a person cannot bequeath the Shvuah, Rabbi Elazar says that they are allowed to take Shvuas Yarshim, that was on the previous Amud. So what exactly should we paskin? Haydaino Do'avid Karav Shmuel Avid, if a judge follows the ruling of Rav Shmuel, that's a good ruling. Do'avid Karav Elazar Avid, if he follows the ruling of Rabbi Elazar, that's also a good ruling. And the Gemara continues along the same lines. Amar Rav Papa says, Hashtar the Yasmi, if you have a document of Yisomim, again in exactly this case, Hashtar the Yasmi says Rashi, the Meis Lova B'Chai Malva case again where the borrower dies during the lifetime of the malva of the lender, so the malva has to take a shvuah, but he cannot bequeath that shvuah according to Rav and Shmuel. So if you have Hashtar the Yasmi, if you have a case of a document of Yisomim in exactly this scenario, Lo Mikra Karina Le, we're not going to tear up the document, Velo Agvuya Magvinan Be, but we're also not going to collect with it. Agvuya Lo Magvinan Be, we won't collect with it. Deal Masiril on Karav Shmuel, maybe we hold like Rav and Shmuel. Well, Mikra Lo Karina Le, but we're not going to tear it up because the Hay Daina Do Ovid, Karav Elazar Ovid, because if a judge rules like Rav Elazar, that is considered to be a good ruling. And Rashi says, Lo Mikra Karinan Le, we're not going to tear it up. Shema Yavo Lifnei Dayan, maybe they'll come before a judge, Sheyadin Karav Elazar, who will rule like Rav Elazar, the Amar Le'el Yarshin Ishbain V'Nolan, again, who said earlier on Dafam on Amar Aleph that the Yarshim are allowed to take the Shuas Yarshim and collect. And the Gemara continues along the same lines. Hahu Daina Do'avid Karav Elazar, there was a certain judge who followed Rebbe Elazar's ruling. Havetzor Mei Rabbanim B'Maseh, there was a Torah scholar in his city. Amar Lei said to him, I sina igartu mima'arava, I'm going to bring you a letter from the west, from Eretz Yisrael. The last ilchas of Rebbe Elazar, that the halacha is not like Rebbe Elazar. Amar Lei said to him, L'chi taisi, when you bring it, then I'll consider it, but for right now, I'm ruling like Rebbe Elazar. Asa Lakami de Rav Chama, he came before Rav Chama. Amar Lei said to him, Haydaina David Rebbe Elazar Avid, I'm not going to write such a letter, because a judge who rules like Rebbe Elazar, that is considered a good ruling. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Ve'elu nishboin, the following take a shvuah, even if there's no claim made against them. And then the Mishnah goes on to list situations where people are taking care of other people's property. And the point over here is that the people who own the property, they want to make sure that the ones taking care of their property didn't take anything. And so again, those people have to take a shvuah to that effect. The Gemara says, Atu b'shuftani askin, well, are we dealing with fools? They're taking a shvuah even though no claim at all has been made against them. And the Gemara continues and clarifies, Hachi Kamar, this is what the Mishnah is saying. The following will take a shvuah even though there is no certain claim being made against them. Ela b'tainas shema, it's just a claim of shema, of maybe. The person is saying, maybe you took something of mine, and then the Mishnah goes on to list the cases, hashutfin, for example, partners, v'harisin or sharecroppers, etc. All of these different cases, they'll have to take a shvuah even with a tainas shema. And the Gemara continues, Tana was taught in a brisa, ben bayis sha'amru, when the Mishnah mentions a ben bayis, that's one of the individuals that's listed again, who takes a shvuah when there's a tainas shema. Lo shenichnas v'yotze baraglev. We're not talking about like a family friend who goes in and out of the house. Ela machnes lo po'alin. We're talking about somebody who brings in workers, umotzi lo po'alin, brings out workers. Machnes lo peiros, umotzi lo peiros. He brings in produce, brings out produce. And therefore, again, if there's a tainas shema that maybe he took something, he has to take a shvuah. And the Gemara continues, umay shnahani. Now, what's the difference that all of these various individuals listed in the Mishnah, why is it that we make them take a shvuah even when there's a tainas shema? And the reason is mishum demoru b'hatera, because they have an easy rationalization for themselves. That's why we make them take the shvuah. Rashi explains, why is it that we make these people take a shvuah even when the claim against them is just an uncertain claim? Mishum demoru b'hatera, because they rationalize liatzmam, they rationalize for themselves. Because they work hard taking care of the property, so they might rationalize and take for themselves. That's why we make them take the shvuah. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yosef Bar Menyume, Amar Rav Nachman, Rav Yosef Bar Menyume says that Rav Nachman says, taina beinaihu shtei kesef. This entire halach applies only if there's some claim between them of two silver ma'ah. The Gemara says, Keman, well, who does that follow? Kishmuel, you're following Shmuel. There was a machlokas earlier in terms of moda and mixas, whether the case involves shtei kesef, or it actually has to be a little more than shtei kesef. That's Rav's opinion, because you have to deny at least shtei kesef. This seems to be following Shmuel, that the total amount in the case is shtei kesef. The Gemara says, Vatani Rabbi Chia l'siyuei l'Rav, but didn't Rabbi Chia bring a brisa that supported Rav? Why are we now following Shmuel? And the Gemara says, you're right, Ema rather say, kefiras taina. We're talking about the denial of the claim has to be shtei kesef, Rav, and we're actually following Rav. And Rashi explains, Sheyesh Tayna B'neihem Shtei Kesef, again, the claim between them is 2 Kesef. What that means is as follows, Shezet Tuanu Shemo Akavta Mishali Shtei Kesef, that the person making the claim, he says, maybe you held, maybe you took from my property 2 Kesef. It has to be that amount at least. V'zem Modelo B'mixas, and then this person admits partially, to Krovahi L'Shvur D'Oraisa, that way it's close to being the case, the classic case of the Shvur D'Oraisa Moda B'mixas, Elo Shetainas Shemahi, but it's a Tainas Shema, it's an uncertain claim, but that specifically is the case, again, where you take this kind of Shvur B'Tainas Shema. But the Gemara says, well, why are we going with Shmuel's amount? V'hatani, Rabbi Chia L'Siyuei L'Rav, didn't Rabbi Chia teach a brisa like Rav, Perek Shavuos Adayonin, this was earlier in Perek Shavuos Adayonin, D'Amar Kfiras Tainas Shtei Kesef, Levad Pruta Shalodah. He says, Rav says there has to be a denial of 2 Kesef, and then there's also a Pruta of admission, and so again, the Gemara therefore revised it and said we actually are talking about the denial being 2 Kesef. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Cholko hashutfin v'harisin, if the partners or the sharecroppers, let's say they dissolve their partnership, so then at that point in time, one partner, let's say, cannot make the other partner take a shvua, absent a definite claim. A definite claim is needed. And the Gemara says, Iboilu, they had the following question, Ma'u legalgel b'derabanan, what about Gilgal shvua? If you have an original shvua that's a derabanan, can you then use Gilgal shvua to impose the shvua? Rashi explains, Ma'u legalgel shvuas harisin shecholku, let's say you have a shvuas harisin, this again, the same kind of shvua for a sharecropper, and in this case, they already dissolved the partnership, al yedei shvua derabanan, but let's say there's another shvua between them, that's a shvua derabanan, could go in shvuas eses, like a shvuas eses, o shel nishboin v'nolin, or there's one of the shvua derabanans where you swear in order to collect, the takanta bi'almaninu, those are just shvua derabanans, but let's say that shvua applies, can we then be megalgel, this other shvua upon the individual? Do we apply Gilgal shvua by a shvua derabanan? The Gemara says, Tashma, come in here, the following proof, this is from a brisa, Lava menu erev shvius, let's say there was a loan, he borrowed from him before the Shemitah year, Ulamatzoi shvius nasa lo shutaf ha'aretz, then after the Shemitah year, they became partners or sharecroppers, and so now that's a derabanan shvua after Shemitah that applies, again, that shvua applies even with an undefinite claim, so ein megalgalin, so you're not allowed to do Gilgal shvua over there, you can't then say, well, since you're already taking one shvua, the shvua derabanan, then we'll put this other shvua upon you. And so the Gemara says now, Taima delava heimenu erev shvius. The reason why you don't have Gilgal shvua here is because the loan was canceled, because there was the person borrowed on erev shvius right before the Shemitah year, so the whole loan was canceled. There's no reason to do Gilgal shvua. The asya shvius afkate, the Shemitah year comes and undoes the loan. Ha shar shnei shavua, but let's say it would just be other years of the Shemitah cycle. Megalgalin, apparently you can start with a shvua derabanan and then use Gilgal shvua and apply it in that fashion. The Gemara says, Lo teimo hashar shnei shavua megalgalin. That's incorrect. Don't say that the brisa means that in other years of the Shemitah cycle you can do Gilgal shvua. Ela rather what it means to say is as follows. It's actually the reverse. Nasa lo shutafo oris erev shvius. Let's say it would be the opposite. Let's say the person would be a partner, sharecropper the year before the Shemitah year. Ulamotzoi shvius lava heimenu, and then after the Shemitah year, then there's a loan. That's now a shvua d'oraisa on the loan. Let's say modim mixas. So then megalgalin. So then you can do Gilgal shvua. But the Gemara says, one second, that case is already taught. Nasa lo shutafo oris erev shvius, if they became partners or sharecroppers erev shvius, ulamotzoi shvius lava heimenu, and then motzoi shvius he borrowed from him, megalgalin. So that we already know that's megalgalin, so that can't be what it's saying. So shma mina, megalgalin b'derabanan shma mina. So the Gemara says, indeed, we do see from this brisa that there's Gilgal shvua by shvua derabanan, and again, the Gemara says, indeed, we do see that that is the case. Rashi explains again the original reading of the Brisa. Before the Shemitah year, there was a loan. After the Shemitah year, they became partners. Ein megalgalan olav shvuas halvod the erev shvius im kafar hakol. So the situation over here is, let's say it was not motive mixas, but it was kofar bakol. But we want to do a Gilgal shvua. We have already the shvua of shutef, and you want to do a Gilgal shvua and do the shvua to the loan by kofar bakol. The shvius sha'avra olav shematata, because since the Shemitah year passed, it cancels the loan. So the Gemara originally inferred hashar shnei shavua megalgalin, but if you wouldn't have a cancellation of the loan because of the Shemitah year, you could do Gilgal shvua, meaning shvuas halva she'ein bahoda. You have a shvua on the loan where there was no admission. Atu shvuas hashutfin. Since you're already taking a shvuas hashutfin, we can apply a shvua to the loan. Alma megalgalin b'derabanan. You see Gilgal shvua by derabanan. Ochashenish nezu b'mei hatanoim adayin lo tiknu shvuas hesis kivimei Rav Nachman tiknu. Now Rashi notes when this halach over here was learned in the times times of the Tanoim, they didn't yet have Shavuos Esses because that was only in the times of Rav Nachman. What Rashi is addressing here is why do we need Gilgul Shvuah for a Shvuah by Kofar Bakol? We have a Shvuah Midrabanan. It's called a Shavuos Esses by Kofar Bakol. Why are we resorting to Gilgul Shvuah? The answer is Gilgul Shvuah did not exist yet at the time of this Brisa, and so that's why the Brisa is discussing whether you can use the Shavuos Hashutfin or the Shavuos Harisin as your primary Shvuah, and then do Gilgul Shvuah to a case of Kofar Bakol. And then the Gemara said, Lo Teima Da'af B'Shar Shnei Shavuot Nami Ein Megalgal and Al Yedei Shavuos Shutfin D'Rabbanan. Don't say that, because even in other years you would not be able to do Gilgul Shvuah. It could be through the Shavuos Shutfin D'Rabbanan. V'haidenak at Shvius, and the reason why we're talking about the Shemitah year, Lav Lafukei Shar Shnei Shavuot, we're not coming to exclude other years in the Shemitah cycle. Elo Eimo Hanasa Lo Shutfis Erev Shvius V'Cholko. What it means is as follows: if it would be the other way around, let's say they would be partners Erev Shvius and they would dissolve the partnership. But then after the Shemitah year, there's a loan. And we're talking about a Shevuot D'Oraisa now. Can go in Behodah B'Mixas, like it was a mode of a Mixas case, Megalgal, and then we would do Gilgul Shvuah. The Chiddush of that would be that the Shemitah year doesn't cancel the Shavuos Hashutvin, Velo Shutfis, and it doesn't cancel in terms of partnerships. Ella Halva, it's only by a loan. That would be the Chiddush. But the point is, again, that's what we're saying. But then the Gemara said that actually was already taught, and so therefore, no, really, this is what the Brisa is teaching. The Brisa is teaching that there is Gilgul Shvuah even by a D'Rabbanan. And the Gemara continues, and again, even by a Shvuah Midrabbanan. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Huna says, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Tes Amar Aleph.